Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and welcome to the show, y'all. This story is about Jojo and Paul, right? Jojo and Paul are brothers. They grew up in the same household, single mother, because their father was locked up in the penitentiary when they were young. This story is common in the hood. It's a sad reality of it. You know what I mean? But I got to share this one with y'all because this has a special twist to it. Jojo and Paul were the total opposites. Opposites. Jojo was just like his daddy. Now, his daddy was a street dude. Everything about the streets he loved, he promoted. He thought that people that were not street dudes were suckers, that they were weak. They were people to be used, manipulated. They were the prey. He didn't see anything wrong with that. And he passed that on to his son, Jojo. Now, Jojo and Paul's father had been locked up for the last 12 years. And he had a few more to go, but he had an out date. He was going to get out. Now, at this time, when the story came to me, Jojo and Paul, they were about 2 years apart. Jojo was older than Paul, right? But they were both in their early 20s, okay? Now, Jojo, like I said, he was in the streets. He was the picture, emulation of his father. He thought that everything that his father talked about and preached about was the business. You know what I'm saying? Paul would be at the visitation table sometimes with their mother and the father, and they would all be talking, and their father would be talking, saying the things that, he didn't want his sons to be weak. He didn't want his sons to be used and manipulated, and they had to learn the ways of the streets. The mother would sit at the table, and she'd be like just in disbelief that he still thought this way. When she met him when he was younger, he thought that way, but she thought he would grow out of it like a lot of women do. She thought that he would grow out of that and grow up and be the man that she knew that he could be the father that she knew that he could be. But he held on to these beliefs even after all the years that he had spent in county jails and now prison. And now he was sitting at the table preaching this stuff to his sons. But his son Paul wasn't receptive to it. Paul was more like his mother. He was a couple of years, 18 months or so years younger than Jojo. But he felt like his mother. He felt like this was crazy. That people in the streets, that lived in the streets and did these types of things, they take advantage of people. This isn't it. But he loved his brother and he loved his father. But Paul had a job. The mother had a job, steady job. Jojo, the money that he bought to help pay expenses at the house was street money. Dope money, robbing, all of this kind of stuff, hustling, whatever he could do in the streets, just like his daddy would do to get money, he would bring that. And he would spend short stints in the county jail, in and out, all of those types of things. But Paul worked, and he loved his job. He loved his job. He worked for the city. Had a good job. Worked for the sanitation department, making a lot of money, for his age, contributing to the household, wanting a better life for his mom, hoping to one day to be able to move her out of the neighborhood that they were in, even though the neighborhood that they were in, because they grew up in it, he was okay. He was okay. People didn't try to rob him or do anything to him or his family because Jojo was in the streets and plus the reputation of his dad. So he was able to still function. And a lot of people in the inner cities, and then let me say this to you. Most people don't believe or realize that the majority of people that live in the hood have jobs. Listen to what I just said. The majority of people that live in the hood have jobs. They might not be high-paying jobs, but they work. They work. They are hardworking people. You have a small percentage of people in the hood that cause the majority of the problems. We know this. But yet we sit on the sidelines and do nothing about it. And then we complain. Anyway, I'm not going to get off on that yet. Because I was finna go there, y'all. You know what I'm saying, about how we complain about stuff. But anyway, Paul one day hoped to be able to move his mom out of that area because he was saving his money and he had his eye on his property. You know what I'm saying? And he had just gotten promoted at work. He was the second in command now. So he worked out of an office. He made sure things were done right. He fixed the schedules for the employees, all of this stuff. He was involved in payroll. He was learning to become a manager. They were grooming him. His supervisor was crazy about him. He thought of him as a son. He knew his background. He knew his father. So he knew that Paul was different. He knew that Paul wanted better. And he felt sorry for Paul, but he didn't take pity on him. Not because of the situation like his daddy, but because his daddy, like I say, Paul's supervisor knew his daddy. And he knew that his daddy was never going to change. That's what he thought. And he felt sorry for Paul because he felt Paul deserved a better father. So he was very protective of Paul at work. When people would talk about him behind his back, the supervisor would straighten that and correct that because he didn't want people doing that. He didn't want Paul to hear that kind of stuff and start to believe that this was his destiny. He wanted him to understand and believe that he could be better. He could be whoever he wanted to be. He had a choice in this. He didn't have to be like his father. So one day when they were at visit, Paul and his mother were walking back to the visitation table, and they overheard Paul's father and his brother Jojo saying something negative about Paul. And it moved Paul and hurt Paul. But Paul's father said that he was telling Jojo, he said, he's not like us. He's different. He's a square. He likes to do stuff like that. That ain't for us. We're different. We are the men of the household. And Paul's father had no idea how that bothered him. And Paul, like always, and his mother, because she heard it too, they just came back to the table and sat down and continued on with the visit. He didn't confront his father. But on the inside, it was breaking his heart because he felt as though his father didn't love him the way that he loved Jojo, because he wasn't a street dude, because he didn't believe in that mess. So, as the story goes, Jojo's in the streets one night. Now keep in mind what I told you about this neighborhood, right? The neighborhood is rough, rugged, and raw. But if you live in that neighborhood, you're used to that. So you get used to the gunshots at night, right? You get used to the car chasing at day. You get used to seeing, the people out on the corner selling drugs and the women out on the corner selling their bodies. You get used to that, right? So Paul would just go about his day, not even being, affected by it in the sense that, let's say, a newcomer, somebody that never seen that and never walked into something like that, if they walked into that, they would be thrown off. They would be thrown off by something like that. But that didn't bother Paul. He had become numb to it. So he just would go his way. But the people in the neighborhood, this mindset of the neighborhood was no snitching. Don't nobody talk to the police. No matter what. No matter what. So one day, there was a shooting. The corner is full of people. People out everywhere. Music playing, drugs being sold. Everything is going on. But there's a shooting. And it's all over TV. And Jojo is laying in the streets covered by a blanket, dead. He had been shot multiple times by an unknown assailant, as it said on the news. They said there were plenty of witnesses, but nobody was cooperating with the police. So when Paul came home to see his mother crying in the living room, he hugged her and he told her, it's going to be okay. I'm going to find out what happened. Whoever did this is going to pay. And she grabbed him and she looked at him. She said, no, let the police handle it. Now, Paul is looking at her. He's shaking because he didn't know what to do. He was afraid because if they killed Jojo, maybe they were next, because they didn't have any idea what Jojo had been into, what he had done to bring this on himself. So it frightened them to the point to where, are we next? A day goes by, 2 days go by, a week go by, nothing happens to them. And nothing is said about who did this. Nothing. The neighborhood moved on as if Jojo had never existed. Everybody was out playing ball. Everybody was out doing the same things that they were doing. But Paul wasn't the same. Every day he would get up and go to work. When he got in his car and he'd drive through the neighborhood, he would look. In his eyes, he would be looking at the people that he grew up with, the people that he knew. And he would say to himself, somebody knows what happened to my brother. Somebody knows. But nobody would say a word. So now he's looking at everybody that he grew up with suspicious eyes. Some of these people, he had spent the night at their house and they had spent the night at his. He grew up with these people in the neighborhood. Yet nobody thought enough of him or his brother or his family to say what had happened, the truth. Because it was this ideology of no snitching in the neighborhood. But Paul wanted somebody to pay. If they didn't go to jail, he wanted street justice. But he wasn't even getting that. So he went to see a couple of friends of Jojo's. People that he ran with every day, every night. And he was talking to him. He said, do you know what happened? Do you know who did it? And they would tell him, don't worry about that. We're going to take care of that. You just go on and do you. You don't belong out here. But he knew they would lie. He knew they were not going to do anything. He knew they were not going to do anything about it. And he was frustrated by that. And he said, just tell me who did it. The whole room went silent. And they stared at him. And after a few seconds, which seemed like be minutes, he got up and he walked out. And on his way out, he said, y'all don't care nothing about my brother. Y'all don't care nothing about me. And when he walked out and shut the door and he was on the other side of the door, they started laughing. He stopped and he turned around and he started to come back in the door. He grabbed the doorknob, but he let it go. And he went and got in his car. And on the way home, he cried because he said he was thinking to himself, what is the problem? How can somebody get killed in the streets and nobody say a word about it? Everybody in the streets talking about how much they love and care about each other and all of these different things. But his brother lay dead in the street and nobody gave a damn. Nobody gave a damn. So now his father is talking to him more on the phone. And he blames his father for Jojo's death, even though he knows that Jojo has to be responsible for the situation that he put himself in. But his father is the one that pumped that mess into his head. So he's talking to his father. He's going to continue to respect his father. But he's going to tell his father the truth about how he feels. And he tells his father that it's your fault. You're to blame for this. You thought that people in the streets, and the lifestyle in the streets, was the way that people should live. That anybody else was a sucker. But your son is laying dead in the streets and nobody cares. Now he's in the cold ground and nobody cares. And you say that this is the lifestyle that you wanted for me and your brother and your son? No. And his father just sat on the other end of that phone in silence. Paul didn't realize, he didn't know, there's no way he could have known, but a tear was rolling down his father's face because his father knew that every word that Paul was saying was true. Every word that he said was true. And now Paul's father was having second thoughts. But these second thoughts should have been his first thoughts. His son is gone. So Paul always told his father before he gave the phone back to his mother, I love you. I love you. But I got to do something about this. I cannot let this rest until somebody is held accountable for what happened to my brother, one way or the other. Now, his father had never heard Paul talk like that. And his mother feared that he would not let this go. How can you? Even though his brother was full of mess, how can you walk away from your brother being killed and laid in the streets and nobody care? Nobody say a word. So Paul, he went and bought him a gun, legally. Law-abiding citizen, he can do that. He said it was for the protection of the house. He wanted to protect his mother. But truthfully, he wanted vengeance. He wanted blood for what happened to his brother. So now his mother, she tells his father, look, if you don't do something, don't call here no more. I don't want to lose my son, our son. I don't want to lose him. And the father says, I don't want to lose him either. Then she says, you have to own it then. You have to tell him the truth about this lifestyle. Stop pretending. Grow up. Become the man that I know you can be. Tell your son you're wrong about what you think. So he listened to her. And he got off the phone. And for most people, this would be easy. This would be easy. There's nothing about the lifestyle that's right. But this was a difficult situation for him. This was a difficult decision for him to make. After a couple of days, he called his wife back and he tells her to bring him to see me. Y'all come up to see me this weekend. So they go to visit. And they're sitting at the table. And it's awkward because they are used to that chair that sits next to Paul's father being occupied by Jojo. But Jojo's no longer here. But Paul wouldn't sit in that seat. He would sit next to his mother like he always has. And that seat sitting next to his father would be empty. And his father knew why he wouldn't sit there. His father reached out and he grabbed his son's hand and he said, look, I've been wrong about this. My whole life, I've thought that the streets was where I belonged. And I pumped that into Jojo. And I was wrong about that. And now he's gone. And I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose you to the streets. So Paul sat there and he's looking at his father, looking at him, staring him dead in the eyes, and Paul's eyes filled with tears, and the tears start to drop and roll down his face. And his mother, she grabs him, wraps her arms around him, and Paul lays his head on his mother's shoulder while his father holds his hand. He's not a grown man right now. He's a little boy, hurting. He wanted his brother back, even though his brother was foul. He wants his brother back, but that can't be. That can't be. But now this family has to move forward. So he tells his father, he said, somebody's got to be held accountable for this. And his father, in his infinite wisdom, tells his son something that will change his son's life forever. And he told him, he said, nobody gets away. He said, I'm not talking about the streets. We're all held accountable for what we do. And if the universe is just, then somebody will have to pay in one way or another for what happened to Jojo. He said, this is the best that we can hope for right now. If the police find somebody, if they don't, we move on. Because I'm to blame. I'm the one to blame for this. The person that killed him, yes, but I'm the one to blame because I did this. I did this to Jojo. And when he looked at his father, he saw something on his father's face that he had never seen before. He saw truth. He saw honesty. And when the tears rolled down his father's face, he knew that this was hard for his father to accept. It was hard for his father to say because he had to own being responsible for the death of his own son because he taught his son that crap. So Paul, he squares his father's hand and he told his father, he said, I love you. I love you, Pops. And his father said, I love you too, son. And they embraced as a family for the first time in a long time. And that ice, that hurt, that pain, that fear that had engulfed Paul started to unthaw. Started to unthaw. And as the days and the weeks went by, he got better. He would get up and he would go to work. He didn't forget about his brother. He didn't forget about his brother at all. But he became more determined than ever to get his mother out of this neighborhood, out of this situation, because he didn't want this anymore. He didn't want to be around this anymore. It wasn't that the people were bad. It was just that what they believed, what they thought was right, was wrong, and he didn't want to be surrounded by wrong anymore. I wanted to tell you that story because we buy into this idea that we can do whatever we want to do and nobody's going to be held accountable. I've said it before, I'll say it again. All of us are going to be held accountable for what we do, whether we get caught by the police or not. But when we do these things to each other, we're committing genocide against our own people. We can complain about what other people don't do, what other resources they don't provide. And we're right about all of that. But that is not an excuse to bring harm and pain to your neighbor. And I don't care who your neighbor is. I don't care what your neighbor looks like. I don't care what race your neighbor is. You don't have any right to bring harm to your neighbor because you're suffering. Now, I understand why you do it, because you believe that this is an option for you. But I'm telling you that it is not. You'll find yourself in prison like me for a long, long time if you don't face the facts of your situation. Play the cards that you dealt and get to it. Play the cards that you dealt, people, and get to it. This has been another episode. Oh, wait a minute. Before I do that, y'all already know. Check out my book. The Move is Coming, okay? This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker. And I say peace, y'all.